The question that has haunted Hollywood's golden boy for decades. A man who has everything: fame, wealth, respect, legacy. Yet when the lights fade and the crowds disappear, he goes home alone. Leonardo DiCaprio. The name itself feels eternal, carved into the very bones of cinema. He has walked across red carpets like a king, smiled under the glow of flashbulbs, held trophies in trembling hands while millions cheered his name. His face has graced magazine covers, his charm has sold dreams, and his eyes, those same eyes that once gazed across the deck of the Titanic, have seen the world fall in love 1,000 times over. And yet, somehow, behind that perfect smile lies a silence that no award can fill. The cameras adore him, the world worships him, but no one ever asks, what happens when the cameras stop? When the lights go out in the dressing room and the echo of applause fades, what does a man like Leonardo DiCaprio see in the mirror? The world's most desired man? Or someone quietly terrified of being known too well? He's played lovers, dreamers, survivors, and saviors, but has he ever truly played himself? For more than 30 years, DiCaprio has mastered the art of illusion. Every role a mask, every film another layer between him and the truth. He has kissed the most beautiful women in the world on screen, but off-screen, he's become the symbol of eternal bachelorhood, a man frozen in time, somewhere between youth and loneliness. People joke about it now. Leo doesn't date women over 25. Memes, interviews, red carpet smirks. But behind that joke is a deeper ache, one the public refuses to see, because it's easier to laugh at someone's pattern than to understand their pain.
The truth is, Leonardo DiCaprio isn't just single. He's alone, in a way that only those who have touched the top of the world can be. In Hollywood, where every smile hides a contract and every friendship has a camera angle, DiCaprio became the rarest thing of all, a man who stopped believing in the fairy tale he once sold. He has watched his friends marry, divorce, start families, grow old, while he remains suspended in the glow of ageless fame. A timeless icon, yes, but also a prisoner of his own legend. When he walks through an Oscar after-party, everyone wants a piece of him, a photo, a memory, a moment. But who wants him? The person beneath the myth. Maybe that's the tragedy, that somewhere along the way, the boy who just wanted to act became the man the whole world wanted to own. And now, after decades of playing every role but the one he was born for, himself, Leonardo DiCaprio stands at the quiet edge of his own story. He's conquered everything except the simplest thing of all: belonging to someone. This isn't just a story about a celebrity who never settled down. It's the story of a man whose smile hides the cost of being perfect, the golden smile of Hollywood, and the loneliness behind it. Because sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. And in Leonardo's shadow, there's a truth he's never spoken until now. Before the fame, before the tuxedos and trophies, before his name became a brand, there was just a boy, a restless, wide-eyed kid from the rougher corners of Los Angeles, born not into glamour, but into noise, struggle, and survival. Leonardo Wilhelm DiCaprio came into the world on November 11th, 1974, not in the Hollywood Hills, but in a cramped apartment near Echo Park, where graffiti painted the walls and sirens sang lullabies at night. His parents, George and Ermeline, were dreamers who fell in love with art, not money. They had little of the latter and an overflow of the former. But dreams, as Leonardo would learn, don't always survive reality. When he was barely a year old, they separated. His mother worked long hours at offices just to keep food on the table, while his father, a struggling comic book distributor, drifted between jobs and ideals. And so, Leo grew up between two worlds, the bright imagination of his father's art and the hard truth of his mother's endurance. He was a child with too many questions and too few answers. Other kids learned how to fit in. Leo learned how to watch, how to study faces, imitate voices, absorb the energy in a room until it felt like he could become anyone. It wasn't acting yet, it was survival. When your parents fight, when the rent is late, when you see sadness on your mother's face every morning, you learn early how to perform calmness, how to pretend everything is fine. That's how Leonardo DiCaprio's first role began, not on a stage, not in front of a camera, but at home, playing the part of a boy who wasn't afraid. He once said in an interview, "I always felt like I didn't belong anywhere. Acting gave me somewhere to be." That sense of dislocation, of floating between worlds, became the quiet heartbeat of his art. As a child, he wasn't the handsome prodigy people might imagine now. He was awkward, wild, too curious for his own good. Teachers called him hyperactive. He was rejected by several talent agents because of his unusual name. One even suggested he should change it to something more American. But Ermeline refused. "You'll be known for your work, not your name." And she was right.
By the age of 10, Leonardo was begging his mother to drive him to every audition she could find. Commercials, background roles, sitcom cameos, anything. He faced rejection after rejection, hundreds of them. Too intense, too emotional, too much. But every no only sharpened his hunger. And then came the small victories, a toy commercial here, a brief TV spot there. Each one lit a spark. Each one told him the same thing. You can't be ordinary. You were never meant to be. In his early teens, he landed a role in the short-lived TV show Growing Pains. For most kids, it would have been a dream. For Leo, it was a promise, a glimpse of the world he'd been chasing through the cracks of poverty. Yet even then, he wasn't satisfied with being just another teen star. He wanted truth, not fame. He wanted to make people feel. That hunger, that ache for authenticity, was what made him dangerous in the best possible way. His teachers said he had a strange focus, like a boy carrying the weight of something invisible. And maybe he was, because when you grow up too fast, you don't dream of being famous, you dream of being seen. And somewhere deep inside, Leonardo DiCaprio was still that little boy standing in a crowded city, looking up at the billboards, whispering to himself, "One day, they'll know my name." But what he didn't know was that the same gift that would lift him to the top of the world, that obsession, that inability to be ordinary, would one day also trap him there. The boy who couldn't blend in became the man the world could never look away from. And as he began his rise, the line between acting and existing started to blur. Because when you spend your whole life pretending, how do you ever learn who you really are?
The world fell in love with a face, and the face never looked the same again. One night on a movie set, one breathless premiere, one rope of flashbulbs, and Leonardo DiCaprio stopped being merely an actor. He became a phenomenon, an emblem, a headline, a silhouette against the white noise of global adulation. The question that followed every cheering crowd was simple and terrible in equal measure. Who is left inside the applause? Titanic was not just a film. It was a tidal wave that lifted him to a height where wind and loneliness became daily companions. He stood on the bow of the world and felt it, the surreal, vertiginous knowledge that you no longer belong to the life you once had. Overnight, the boy from Echo Park found himself the unattainable prize of a generation. Teenagers plastered his portrait on bedroom walls. Magazines ran covers that made him a myth. Late-night hosts dissected his smile like scripture. The love was immediate, ravenous, indiscriminate. He was adored not for who he was, but for the roles he perfected, for a version of desire he made feel universal.
But adoration can be a sedative and a snare. The more people loved him, the less they needed the man himself. They needed an idea, a flawless image, a story told in celebrity snapshots and soundbites. The industry built a cathedral around that image. Interviews rehearsed to the inch, public appearances calibrated for maximum charm, relationships stylized to fit a marketable narrative. He learned quickly how to perform the role the world wanted: the charismatic heartthrob, the brooding genius, the tender star who could carry an entire film on a single look. And yet, behind the curtain of that phenomenon was a different, stranger entity: the Phantom. The Phantom was not the same as the man people applauded. It was the hollow that forms when your reflection becomes currency. It is the echo that returns when every room has been filled with people who do not come to see you, but to be seen with you. He felt the shift in small, seismic ways. The immediate flock of cameras at airports, the strangers asking for photographs as if affection could be bottled in a selfie. The way private dinners turned into publicized lists. The Phantom swallowed privacy slowly, politely, like a tide moving over a shoreline until there was no more shoreline left. Acting had once been his sacrament, a place to transform pain into something shared. But as his career ballooned, roles became both refuge and trap. Each character offered an intimate confession that millions consumed as entertainment. The very intimacy he gave to his art created a paradox. By revealing parts of himself on screen, he made his real self rarer, more precious, and consequently more imitated than known. It is easy to believe you are understood when millions claim they are moved by your on-screen grief or joy. It is harder to bear the realization that those claims are often for the character, not the man who created it. This dissonance settled into the rhythms of his days. Red carpets blurred into hotel suites, late-night talk shows into luxury premieres, earnest conversations into interviews with prepared answers. People began to speak to him in the voices of his characters, attributing to him the very vulnerabilities he crafted for fiction. An intimate encounter on a film set would be repackaged into gossip columns. A whispered romantic scene would become global commentary on his private life. The Phantom fed on this recycling, a perpetual loop where genuine feeling was sampled, remixed, and sold back as narrative. Relationships, too, became barometers of this new reality. The women who entered his orbit were often framed as part of the myth, rather than partners of a complex person. He appeared in tabloids with models and actresses, each relationship parsed into a public storyline.
Yet beneath the glossy pages and the staged photographs, there was often a quiet loneliness, lovers who found themselves competing not with other people, but with a public image that demanded consistency, youth, and spectacle. The pattern, while reductive to outsiders, reflected a truth. Intimacy in the age of attention is fragile. When one partner cannot be sure whether they are loved for themselves or for the role they play in the public imagination, the foundation of any relationship trembles. Career choices only increased the separation. Directors handed him parts that required deep excavation. Men haunted by regret, by obsession, by moral rot. He dove into these parts with devotion, seeking truths in their edges. Yet every honest excavation yielded footage that augmented the myth, another layer of the mask he wore in public. Critics lauded his fearlessness. Audiences devoured the transformation. But each accolade also reinforced a private equation he could not solve. The further he walked into fictional lives, the further he stepped away from his own. He became the man who could convincingly die 100 times, but who had not yet learned how to live without the security of a script. And then there was the world beyond screens, a ruthless marketplace that commodified youth and beauty. In such a marketplace, aging becomes a threat to currency. So patterns emerge, companions chosen for their capacity to amplify an image rather than grow with a person. The media spun theories, some cruel, some speculative, about why he remained unattached in the long term. Yet none of those blunt instruments caught the true complexity of the man inside the phantom's shadow. He had cultivated standards not out of arrogance, but out of self-preservation. Perhaps a fear of repeating cycles witnessed in his parents' fractured union. Perhaps a desire to never hand over the part of himself that could still be private. There is a tenderness in his choices that is often invisible. The care with which he chooses collaborators, the intensity with which he prepares for roles, the loyalty he shows to causes he believes in. He is an activist, a protector of fragile ecosystems, a man whose public persona belies a private conscience. But these virtues are not explanatory of his solitude. They are counterpoints to it. They illuminate that his detachment is not a failure of the heart, but a complicated response to the way the world demands pieces of him in exchange for adoration.
So the phenomenon grew, and the phantom shadowed every triumph. The man who once escaped into characters to be found now risked being lost in the very myth he had helped create. And as he navigated films, festivals, and fervor, the same question echoed like a refrain. Can the person who has become a symbol ever be loved simply as a person? Or does the wheat of myth crush the fragile mechanics of intimacy? In the theater of public life, the applause never ends. In private, the silence speaks. Leonardo DiCaprio reached the apex of adulation and discovered, as many do, that the summit can be deceptive. From that height, the air is thin, and the distance between appearances and authenticity grows wider. The phenomenon dazzled, the phantom lingered, and the man, beneath them both, began to feel the pull of a question that would shape the next act of his life. How do you reclaim yourself when the world prefers the idea of you? They called him the last romantic of a loveless age, a man who could make a single glance feel like destiny, and yet walk away before it ever turned into permanence. Every photograph, every tabloid headline, every whispered rumor about Leonardo DiCaprio and the women who entered his orbit became part of a grander illusion, not just of love, but of what love should look like when the world is watching. From supermodels to actresses, from fleeting encounters on yachts to quiet dinners in private villas, the narrative remained unchanged. Leonardo, the eternal bachelor, the man who could have anyone but seemed to want no one for long. To some, it looked like arrogance, a refusal to settle down. To others, it was heartbreak in disguise, a ritual of closeness followed by retreat. But beneath the neon glare of celebrity and the cruel simplicity of gossip columns lay something far more human. A man trying again and again to be understood without being consumed. Love for him had always existed in a world divided by lenses. When the world first fell in love with him, it wasn't with him, but with Jack Dawson, the wide-eyed dreamer who taught an aristocrat to fly in Titanic. Since then, every woman he met was, in some way, meeting Jack first, or Gatsby, or Howard Hughes. They fell in love with the myth before they could reach the man. And that is the quiet tragedy of fame. The line between fiction and feeling dissolves until both taste the same. The women who stood beside him weren't simply lovers, they were mirrors. Gisele Bündchen, the Brazilian supermodel who matched his fame stride for stride, saw in him a soul like hers, restless, global, misunderstood. They burned brightly, too brightly, and when it ended, both turned towards something quieter, she to family, he to work. Then came Bar Raffaelli, whose gentleness and grounded spirit offered the calm he had long craved. For a time, it seemed he had found balance. But in the end, fame disrupted the fragile rhythm once more. Schedules, cameras, expectations. He drifted back to the one thing that never betrayed him, his craft. Later came Blake Lively, then Tony Garn, Camila Morrone, names that fueled headlines but masked patterns deeper than gossip columns could trace. He was often accused of repeating the same story: younger women, brief romances, graceful exits. But what no one wrote about was why. Behind the cynicism of tabloids lay a man afraid, not of commitment itself, but of the exposure it demanded. To love truly would mean being known fully, and to be known fully would mean losing the last corner of his life untouched by the spotlight.
In interviews, he dodged questions about marriage and family with humor, with charm. "I'm just focused on my work right now." The audience laughed, but behind the quip was an old ache. He had seen too much of the chaos that love can bring. His parents' relationship, though filled with affection, had fractured when he was a child. Divorce taught him early that even love that begins in sincerity can end in silence. Perhaps that memory never left him. Perhaps every romance since was a rehearsal for what he feared most: watching love dissolve under pressure. His friends described him as loyal, generous, intensely protective. Yet there was always distance, a small, invisible moat around his inner world. He could be surrounded by laughter, by the most beautiful people on earth, and still feel a loneliness that no amount of attention could drown. The more people adored him, the less he trusted adoration. What did they see? The man or the legend built around him? The press, ever hungry, began to mock his consistency. The phrase DiCaprio and his models became a meme, a punchline. But behind the humor, there was something almost cruel: the world punishing a man for refusing to play the domestic ideal it demanded. He was called immature, afraid of aging, addicted to youth. Yet what if the truth was simpler? That he had found a strange kind of safety in impermanence. To love briefly was to love without losing himself. To keep moving was to stay free. Still, freedom carries its own form of emptiness. There were nights, rare, unguarded, when he was seen sitting alone at events, staring past the noise, as if searching for something he once had and lost. In friends' testimonies, he often spoke about peace, about needing to protect his sanity in a world that feeds on chaos.
The very fame that had given him everything now asked for everything back: his youth, his privacy, his tenderness. And so he built walls, soft ones made of humor and charm, reinforced with work. Acting became his second skin again, a place where he could risk emotion without paying the price of real vulnerability. In The Great Gatsby, when he whispered, "Can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can," audiences swooned. But maybe, deep down, it wasn't Gatsby speaking, it was Leonardo, a man trying to recreate a purity of connection that no longer exists once you've been turned into an icon. His relationships began to look less like failures and more like attempts at escape, moments of normalcy amid the noise. He dated women who still had dreams ahead of them, perhaps because he saw in them a version of himself that fame had stolen long ago. It wasn't about power or vanity, it was nostalgia. To love them was to remember what it felt like to be unshaped by the world. But the myth devours nuance. The myth simplifies. To the world, he is still the man who refuses to grow up, the eternal bachelor surrounded by beauty. They forget the cost of being watched, the exhaustion of performing perfection, the fatigue of pretending that fame equals fulfillment. In truth, Leonardo DiCaprio lives with a paradox. He can play love flawlessly on screen, but in real life, the script always breaks. Some say he is waiting, not for a perfect woman, but for a moment when he can be imperfect and still loved. Others believe he has simply chosen solitude as his form of peace. Whatever the truth, one thing remains undeniable, that behind every fleeting headline, every red carpet smile, and every whispered rumor is a man still searching for the one thing even fame cannot guarantee: genuine connection. In a world obsessed with spectacle, his loneliness is almost poetic. He stands surrounded by light, yet his eyes often carry the stillness of someone watching it all from behind glass. The women may change, the myth may evolve, but the man remains, quietly yearning for something real, something unphotographed, something that doesn't need to be explained. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all, that the man who made the world believe in love has spent his life learning how impossible it is to find when you are the myth everyone else is chasing. They say every actor plays one role too long, the moment when performance bleeds into personhood, and you no longer remember who started the act. For Leonardo DiCaprio, that line blurred years ago. Somewhere between the boy who wanted to be taken seriously and the man who became a symbol of everything Hollywood worships: youth, beauty, perfection. The soul beneath the spotlight began to fracture.
He once said in an interview, "Fame isolates you in ways you don't expect. It gives you everything, and then quietly takes away the part of you that can enjoy it." That confession, brief and half-smiling, carried a truth heavier than most realized, because by the time Leonardo reached his 40s and 50s, the image the world had built around him had turned into something unbreakable, an armor that glittered but suffocated. For decades, he had been the embodiment of charisma, the untouchable prodigy, the man who could reinvent himself with every role: a junkie poet, a Wall Street monster, a haunted dreamer, a doomed lover. But what happens when every identity you inhabit is more vivid, more alive, more passionate than the life you actually live? When the applause fades and the costumes are gone, what remains? Behind the camera flashes and the roaring crowds, Leonardo DiCaprio began to wrestle with an invisible crisis, one not of fame, but of self. He had mastered transformation so perfectly that he forgot what it meant to simply be. Acting, once his sanctuary, had turned into both his gift and his prison. Every performance asked him to dig deeper, to bleed more truth onto the screen, but in the process, he kept leaving pieces of himself behind. By his mid-40s, the Hollywood machine had crowned him as one of its last true artists, a perfectionist, a visionary, an actor who chased truth through chaos. The Revenant earned him his long-awaited Oscar, but also something else, an emptiness he hadn't anticipated. He had finally won the validation that the world demanded, yet when he held that golden statue in his hand, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like silence. Because what do you chase once you've reached the peak of a mountain that never promised peace? Friends began to notice changes. He became quieter, more withdrawn. Gone were the days of constant parties and paparazzi trails. He started disappearing to remote locations, the Galapagos Islands, the icy plains of Greenland, always searching for stillness, for meaning beyond the noise. He spoke less about fame and more about the planet, about survival, about time running out. Environmental activism became not just a cause, but a mirror for his own fears, that everything beautiful, including youth, including purpose, is slipping away faster than we can save it. In private moments, he was said to wrestle with questions that haunted him more than any role. Had he sacrificed a real life for an immortal image? Was the devotion to art a noble obsession or a disguise for loneliness? People still called him the Golden Boy, but he no longer felt golden. The mirror showed a man whose eyes carried stories that fame could never tell: fatigue, reflection, quiet grief. The roles he began to choose shifted too. Gone were the romantic heroes and reckless dreamers. Instead came darker, slower, heavier men, haunted detectives, aging titans, characters whose brilliance could no longer shield them from their own decay. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a confession. Every film became a dialogue between Leonardo and his own shadow. The camera didn't just record him, it revealed him. Yet even as he matured, the world refused to let him age. The tabloids still painted him as the eternal bachelor, the playboy frozen in time, the man who refused to grow old. They didn't see that he had grown old, just not in the ways they could photograph. Inside, he was a man carrying the ghosts of all the versions of himself the world had demanded: the prodigy, the sex symbol, the artist, the activist, the myth, and beneath them all, the child who just wanted to be enough. The tragedy of Leonardo's story isn't that he played too many roles. It's that he played them so perfectly that the world forgot he was acting. His smile became legend, his eyes a brand. Even his silences became performance. And somewhere in that relentless expectation, the real Leonardo learned to disappear quietly, not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion. Because to remain visible at his level means to never rest, to never falter, to never fail. And failure in Hollywood is treated like death. So he chose distance, meditation over parties, conservation work over interviews, the sea over the stage. To the world, it looked like retreat, but to him, it was rebirth, a way to remember what it felt like to live for something that wasn't applause. He began spending long stretches of time alone, documenting climate change, working with scientists, listening to people who didn't care about celebrity. In those moments, he wasn't Leonardo DiCaprio, the icon. He was Leonardo, the observer, the student, the man learning how to be small again.
Still, the price of the eternal role lingers. When he walks red carpets now, the cheers sound different. They echo. They remind him of how much of his life was spent trying to live up to an image sculpted by millions of strangers. And though his smile remains practiced and perfect, it no longer hides the same boyish light. There's wisdom there now, and a little sadness too. The kind that only comes from knowing the truth behind your own myth. Because fame, at its core, is an illusion that demands constant feeding. And Leonardo DiCaprio, for all his brilliance,
has finally realized that the illusion will never love him back. It applauds him, it worships him, but it doesn't see him. The audience always leaves when the lights go down. And so, the man who once made the world believe in forever now spends his days chasing something far more fleeting: presence. Real moments, real silence, real humanity. He's not searching for another Oscar or another headline. He's searching for the person who existed before all of this. The boy from Los Angeles who just wanted to make people feel something. Perhaps that's the ultimate irony. In a city built on pretending, Leonardo DiCaprio's greatest struggle has always been the same: learning how to be real. They say the loudest sound in an actor's life isn't the ovation, it's the silence that comes after. When the curtain falls, the lights dim, and the last camera flash fades into nothing, that's when the truth finally speaks. For Leonardo DiCaprio, that silence has become both a companion and a question. There was a time when applause was everything: the thunder of admiration, the flashing lights, the endless affirmation that he mattered. For decades, that sound was his heartbeat, proof that the sacrifice was worth it. Every sleepless night, every lost relationship, every wound hidden behind a smile. Applause meant purpose. But now, standing on the other side of a life most people only dream of, Leonardo has discovered something unsettling. The applause doesn't last. It never does. When the crowds disperse and the interviews stop, what remains is the echo, faint, haunting, beautiful, and empty. The silence after the applause is where the mask falls, where the myth exhales, and the man finally breathes. In that stillness, DiCaprio has found something Hollywood could never offer him: the truth of who he is when no one is watching. He no longer needs to chase the next performance or prove his worth through another masterpiece. For the first time, he seems to be listening, not to directors or critics, but to the quiet pulse of his own soul.
He's often seen now in the calmest of places, drifting across blue oceans, walking through unspoiled forests, standing at the edge of glaciers, as if staring into the soul of the earth itself. Those who know him say he's changed. His laughter is softer, his eyes slower, his words more deliberate. The man who once thrived in the chaos of film sets now seems to worship stillness, maybe because he finally understands how rare it is. You see, fame is a kind of noise, constant, addictive, and deceitful. It makes you mistake recognition for love and applause for understanding. But silence doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter. It simply reveals. It tells you whether you can stand alone, without the music of validation, without the echo of your own legend. And for DiCaprio, learning to love that silence has been the greatest role of all, not performed, but lived. He's spoken in recent years about time, how quickly it moves, how much it takes, how little it gives back. There's a maturity now in his voice, a gravity that wasn't there before. He knows the curtain of youth has fallen. The boy who ran through the streets of Los Angeles with a dream in his pocket has become a man who understands that even dreams age. And that's the quiet tragedy behind every Hollywood icon. You outlive your myth, but you never escape it. For Leonardo, the silence has become a kind of grace, a sacred space where he can finally hear himself think. No more pretending, no more characters, No more endless reinventions. Just a man sitting with the consequences of a life lived in the brightest possible light. The fame that once felt eternal now feels fragile, fleeting, and strangely unnecessary. He said to friends, "I used to think my legacy would be in the films. Now I think it's in what I leave behind when I stop speaking." Those words capture the transformation perfectly, from performer to philosopher, from image to essence. Because in the end, the most profound legacy isn't measured in awards or box office numbers, but in awareness, in the quiet example of someone who dared to stop running and simply be. There's something poetic about watching Leonardo DiCaprio today, a man who has lived 1,000 lives on screen, finally learning to live one of his own. He still smiles for cameras, still attends premieres, still delivers the same charm that made the world fall in love with him. But now there's something else behind that smile, a kind of peace, or maybe acceptance, that whispers, the performance is over. The irony, of course, is that his truest role, the one no script could capture, began when the audience stopped watching. In the silence after the applause, DiCaprio found what the world's noise had stolen, himself. And perhaps that's what his story was always leading to. Not fame, not perfection, but understanding. Understanding that no applause, no love, no success will ever mean more than the quiet you make peace with at the end of it all. Because when the lights fade and the noise disappears, all that remains is the man, not the myth, not the movie star, but the human being who learned that silence, in the end, is not emptiness. It's freedom.